Let's take these rocks and make them look like this. Each of these rocks has gone through the rough grit stage and is about to move on to the second medium grit. Normally, I aim for rocks to look smooth and round like a jelly bean before I move them on to the next stage, but sometimes that's not possible. Take these rocks, for example. They each have significant fractures and deep crevices. They were never going to reach that perfect, smooth shape. So instead of leaving these as filler in the rough stage until they grind to dust, I'm going to move these along to the next stage. I'm going to use my Diamond Pacific Mini Sonic, which is a vibratory tumbler that moves a little bit faster than a regular rotary. So I load up this barrel, I add some ceramic pieces to fill in some of the gaps, and then it will run on this machine here for each of the remaining stages until these rocks are finally polished. Now, let's skip ahead to where everything's done. This large crack here is still big enough to slip my fingernail in, but most of the rock has a pretty flawless shine to it, right? So while the translucency of the quartz shows that there are these fractures really all over the place inside of this rock, that didn't prevent the exterior from taking on a really nice polish. Here's another one where we can see basically the same thing. There's a fracture line that's pretty significant, but most of the fractures and cracks that you see are really below the surface of the rock, so it didn't prevent it from polishing. This one here, frankly, just looks like it needs a bath. The staining on it just isn't very pretty, unfortunately. The fractures on this rock weren't as significant as they were on the first two rocks, but I think they're more plentiful, and several of them did interfere with the polishing process and left behind these kind of matte lines and indentations along portions of the surface. Now this yellow one here made me a little bit nervous. This hole down here is really the big problem, but the whole rock really looks almost like it's a bunch of small sand crystals just stuck together. But it still looked really good polished. Personally, I really like these semi-translucent rocks with these weird internal lines. Sure, there are some areas here that aren't perfect, but that's all right. Now here we have a big fracture, plus some chipped spots. Normally, I would leave something like this in longer to address those chips, but I really don't want to lose the red coloring, so I went ahead and moved it on. It would have been really nice if it didn't have these fractures, because I do think they're a little bit distracting from the really pretty change in color that you can see here. I think that change in color would be a little bit more prominent without the thick lines. Another one of those pieces with all the little fractures inside, these almost create like a bubbly appearance. I just love the way this one turned out. Now, this one's very similar as well. There's this fracture line along here, which I can feel pretty well even after polishing it, but that's okay. All right, here's a big chunk of milky white quartz. I wish this had been just a little bit more clean along some of these corners, because it's really pretty otherwise. Now this might be our deepest fracture from the entire batch. Normally, I just would not have even bothered with this rock. It does look okay polished, but I'll probably just have to stick this one in a vase with a bunch of other rocks where the fracture won't be as visible. Some very pretty colors on this one, even with those holes on the top. I'm pretty sure this one here is my favorite out of the whole batch. Now this one I took to my flat lap to remove a spot, and I wasn't sure how that rough area would turn out, but it does seem like it polished up really well. This one has a couple of rough spots, but really nothing too bad. This one came out beautifully. It does still have that little fracture there, but I just love these colors. It's like staring into the Milky Way galaxy. Now this one has a chip in it. Normally, I would have left it in for another week or two to get rid of that chip, but I figured it'd be a good experiment to just see what it looks like with that chip. I think it did turn out pretty well. So, another successful batch is in the books. Thanks for coming along the ride with me.